You are listening to Crime Unraveled, a Buck Taylor novel by Chuck Morgan.
Chapter 15. Dr. Jeremy Ratzenberger and Todd Quinlan parked their SUV at the end of a long dirt track on the north side of Glenwood Canyon, outside the town of Dotsero. They grabbed their backpacks from the back and threw 4 long lengths of climbing rope over their shoulders. The path they were following was overgrown and near impossible to see unless you knew where to look, but with the closure of I-70 through the canyon, this was the only way to reach the no-name fault. After gaining elevation over the last 2 hours, they reached their destination about midday. They dropped their loads, and Dr. Ratzenberger pulled a pair of binoculars out of his backpack and scanned the stratified wall in front of them. While he did that, Todd pulled a laser measuring device out of his backpack and took readings on specific landmarks along the fault line. He made notations and recorded the readings on his digital tablet. "I don't see any slippage along the fault line," said Dr. Ratzenberger. "What do your readings show compared to the C-dot readings from when the highway was built?" Todd set down the laser measurer and opened a file on his tablet. He opened a page to a list of seismic readings, ran his finger down the list and checked his notations. "There's been some minor movement over the years, but nothing that would contribute to the damage we saw outside the tunnel. Most of the readings are negligible." "Let's take a closer look," said the doctor. They picked up their loads and continued the trek to the stratified wall's base, dropping their loads and pulling out their climbing harnesses. Todd hooked onto the climbing rope and approached the wall. "On belay," he said. "Belay on," said the doctor. Todd reached up for his first handhold and started climbing the wall. 10 feet up, he pulled a small nut off his harness, slid it into a crack in the rock and pulled to make sure it was anchored. He slipped a carabiner onto the rope hanging from the nut, twisted the clip until it was tight, and pulled to make sure it held. Satisfied, he clipped into the carabiner and continued climbing. He continued this same pattern every 10 to 15 feet for the next hour and a half until he reached the no-name fault line where he anchored in. He scanned the fault line for 10 feet on either side of his position, pulled his phone, and took several high-resolution photos. He called down to the doctor and reversed the process, removing the nuts and cams as he lowered himself down the wall. Once on the ground, he unstrapped his harness, recoiled the rope and handed the doctor his phone. Dr. Ratzenberger looked at the photos. "Just like we thought. No movement. I don't think the slide was caused by an earthquake, but let's head over to the other side of the canyon. There's that large group of fault lines north of Cottonwood Pass Road. Let's check those to be sure." They grabbed their gear and headed back to where they parked, loaded it, and headed the SUV back towards Dotsero. After inching along Cottonwood Pass Road with all the westbound traffic, Todd took a right at a small farm road, crossed over the grate, and continued north for another mile. He stopped in a small group of trees and parked. With dusk coming on, they set up camp in the trees, ate a meal of freeze-dried foods, and crawled into their sleeping bags, sleeping cowboy style, out under the stars. They woke to frost on their sleeping bags, fired up a small backpacking stove, and cooked breakfast. Once again, they grabbed their gear and started a short 1-mile trek over uneven ground until they reached the first of about a dozen unnamed fault lines that covered the area. They took measurements, compared them to historic readings, and moved on. By mid-morning, they had covered 6 of the lines and approached a crevice that had cracked open during an earthquake many eons ago. Todd dropped his backpack and climbing ropes and walked up to the edge. Shading his eyes with his hands, he looked into the crevice and called over to the doctor. Dr. Ratzenberger stepped up to the edge. Todd pointed into the crevice. "I think there's a person down there." The doctor looked at where he was pointing. "I think you're right. Hey buddy, can you hear us? Hey, up here." He looked at Todd. "Grab your gear. He might be still alive." "How the hell did he get down there? It's not like the crevice is hidden and you could fall into it by accident," asked Todd as he strapped on his harness. The doctor found a large boulder and tied off the rope so they had a decent anchor, and he threw the rope into the crevice. The crevice wasn't deep, maybe 30 feet or so, but it was narrow and would be a tight fit for Todd, who clipped onto the rope and stepped over the lip. Using his feet, he worked his way down until he hit the bottom. He unclipped and stepped over to the body. He was shocked when he looked at the head wound. He yelled up to the doctor. "Hey doc. This guy's been shot. He's dead." He stepped away from the body, clipped back onto the rope and climbed out of the crevice. "Fuck. He was shot in the head," he said as he unclipped from the rope and removed his harness. Dr. Ratzenberger pulled his phone out of his back pocket, looked up a number and dialed. This was not how he had hoped to finish the day.
Thank you for listening to this chapter of Crime Unraveled, a Buck Taylor novel by Chuck Morgan. You can find the entire crime series as well as other novels by Chuck Morgan at chuckmorganbooks.com or on Amazon.